Hey string players, welcome back to Worship and Strings. I haven't done a tutorial video in quite a long time, so I wanted to add some new tips that I did not mention too much in my other videos. So there's going to be way more value in this one, and it's going to be worth your time. So stick around and let's get into it. Now, of course, this one is the obvious, but we can't neglect how important it is. What is the tempo, the key signature, and theme and background of the worship song? This is important to consider because it's going to impact how we're going to create the harmonizing lines and even impact the melodic lines if we're asked to do so by our worship leader. And more on that in the next slide. We also want to remember that the worship band setting is obviously different from your classical music setting. In the classical music setting, we obviously have sheet music, there are notes to refer to and play, but then in a worship band setting, we normally have chord charts. And there are two ways of looking at this. Like, either we kind of go into this panic mode, but there's this other perspective where it's like, oh, this is actually quite easy because it is. I think we tend to like, at least for me, I overcomplicated the entire process of what a string player should do when playing with a worship band. But it is something that should not be overcomplicated because in a way that we mentally have to shift into a completely different role when we're playing with the worship band as string players because that's essentially what it is. But then more on that later, of course. The common things that we should think about obviously are the tempo, key signature, of course, and any music at all. And I like to consider the background of the worship song the composer's intention because it plays into when certain instruments come in, when we're supposed to come in, when are we supposed to begin playing in the worship song? How are we going to create lines that complement the lyrics too of the worship song? So, if anything, I don't wear the mindset of a string player. Of like, if that makes any sense. I mean, I'll probably make another video about that, but I do not wear the shoes of a string player when I'm with a worship band. Instead, I wear the shoes and mind of an artist because we are creating lines on the spot. And yes, it is improv, it is ad libbing, but in the most beautiful way possible, especially in an environment that would would essentially be crossover because that's what we're doing. We're crossing over the classical beauty of the strings into the modern contemporary style of worship bands. So then how can we do that effectively? Well, we have to check in with our worship leader or church music director because they may have specific requests from us that we may not know about. So that's why it's important to communicate with them first. And I would do this first. I think you could listen to the original recording, yes, and then talk it out with your worship leader, asking them, is there any particular solo line you want me to play, whether it's in the intro or it's in the transition or it's in the interlude, because there are some of those in between verses and choruses. And a lot of the times we could hear these kinds of lines, these kinds of solo instrumental parts in the original recordings. And there were occasions too where it was the piano playing the intro part, but the worship leader asked me to play it on the violin, like that line that the keyboardist was playing. And I think a really good example of this was when I was playing a hymn version of Be Thou My Vision, and for me to incorporate more of like that Irish style, especially by the violin. And, it makes so much sense too since strings and violin is a very popular instrument within the Irish genre. Now, here's the part where you would have to listen to if they don't necessarily say anything, they don't give you a clear answer. They're just kind of like, I'm just going to let you figure that out because, I'm not a string player. I didn't grow up with classical training. I just think that you would know what to do and, when to come in, things like that. But then I'm just going to leave it up to you kind of thing. In that case, of course, that's something we don't want to hear. We love practical requirements. We love to be told, like, detail by detail, because, of course, as classical string players, we're detail oriented. In that case, your role as the classical string player is the accompaniment for the worship band. And one particular ensemble that kind of helps with this, like if you have grown up with classical training and that's essentially all you know, is more so chamber music, because in a chamber ensemble setting, that is where you have to do the most listening, you have to do the most anticipating. Even if you have sheet music in front of you, like there's a lot of engagement that you would have to do in that kind of setting. And yeah, I guess more so in chamber music settings than orchestral settings. But then there are occasions where it has to be that way in orchestral settings too. But then definitely chamber music would be so closely related to how engaged you have to be in a worship band setting as a classical string player. And this is where the real work begins. Gotta open up those ears, string players, because we have to listen well to the other instruments around us. Of course, it is easier to just focus on our own playing. And, there's so much to think about already. And I know, of course, this is why I highly recommend, I highly suggest, and I mean, in a way, like it should be required that you have solid technique and solid intonation, solid everything, like a really good physical relationship with your instrument in order to play with the worship band. Otherwise, it will get harder. So you must have achieved the tone that you want, the style that you want with the violin or with your viola or your cello, because in the worship band environment, you're not going to have the time to do that. If I'm going to be totally honest, and if I say it in the nicest way possible, you will not have time to think about, more of like the self part. It's more of like, how can you blend with the ensemble? Like that is something you're going to have to think about a lot more than anything else right now. And of course, how you're going to glorify God. I mean, we can't leave that out. I mean, that's technically why like you're in this in the first place. I mean, of course, we want to use our gifts to glorify God. Like that's something you're going to have to focus on too. So, there's already a lot. But this one, my friend, is the most important. We have to listen to the other instruments in our worship band and how they sounded in the original recording by the original artists themselves. This is because it gives us an idea as a classical string player of when to begin playing, when to build up with the band, especially when the drums start building up. Like, that's why, for me, I personally think that the best instruments to listen for are the bass guitarists and the drummers. So they give so they give like crystal clear answers as to when we can also begin playing more crescendoing, even like playing loud or even playing softer. They give us the answers right there and then. And you could refer to the original recording moderately. I wouldn't heavily rely on it. I mean, I think but at the same time, it's a good frame of reference to refer to. But at the same time, there's going to be rehearsals with your worship band, or with whichever band that you're going to lead worship with. That's the band you're going to have to listen to the most with 110% focus. Because in this same environment, you will have to do this anticipate, anticipate, anticipate. There's a saying actually where I forgot who it is. I'm so sorry, guys. But some conductor said the magic doesn't necessarily happen in the performance, it happens in the rehearsal space. And I fully agree. And I think we should not underestimate how powerful rehearsal sessions are. Not just because, we'll figure out and we'll get to know like when to play or what to play, things like that. But we also get a realization of how we can create beauty in such a modern environment, such as a worship band setting. And of course, I talked about this a little bit earlier of like when to rise, when to fall within the music, and how the bassist and and guitarists too, but then mainly the bassists and drummers are the ones that we have to listen to when we rise and fall within the music. Because yes, we should also prioritize listening to the main vocalists and our keyboardists as well, because everything that they're doing, everything that they're playing is also relevant to what we have to listen for as string players. Because we also have to remember that change is absolutely normal. It's so normal. And as classical string players, we have to be adaptable to change like that, because if not, it puts us in a position of not looking as prepared. And we obviously don't want to look like that, when we're leading worship, up there with the band. And I would obviously not want that either for you. So it is best to be so laser focused, be incredibly open, keep your ears open to what instruction the worship leader is going to give you, how loud the band's going to get, how soft the band's going to get during the verse, how many times they're going to play the bridge too. Like, all of these are going to be so important. So just as you have your pencil ready to mark your sheet music and orchestra, have it ready in your worship band rehearsals too. I mean, if you have an iPad too, you could save on paper as well. It's like all the things, right, you have to do to like adapt or change quickly. Just do it. Like, do whatever it takes, because you will need all of that. You will need whatever it takes to adapt to change quickly, because that's what this environment is truly. And yes, it will test you in the beginning. Of course, like everything done in the beginning is not easy, and it is quite the grind. But then I promise, the more that you do this, the more that you play with the worship band, it does get easier. So rest assured with that fact, and know that I have way more resources here in my description box of this video to make it a bajillion times, I mean, bajillion, well, at least, a lot easier for you than it was for me, because this took me 20 years to figure out. This could take you, honestly, hours, maybe even less than that, because you have all the resources right here. And it's the price of a private lesson, if I'm going to be totally honest. So, I mean, bang for your buck, right? So, you definitely don't want to be like me trying to find this information for 20 years. You could just have it down below. But then, other than that, this these are the tips that have helped me significantly, and it's going to help you as well, as you are going to lead worship with the band. And I am excited for you. I'm excited that you're going to use your gifts that God has given you to glorify Him. And let me know too what other videos you guys want me to create, and I will see you guys in the next video.